everything's ready. So, with the motion, on the motion, this House as a parent will prohibit their children from getting into romantic relationships. I now invite upon the Prime Minister to start the debate. Here.
My speech in 3, 2, 1. As a child coming from your typical Asian family, my parents have always prohibited me from getting into any relationships since I was young. Looking back and debating this motion right now, I realized just how important and how beneficial it was for my parents to stop me from getting into my relationship. So I'll be presenting 2 arguments, but before that, I'd like to go into my case setup. So firstly, we define children as children who are under 13, which then consider them teenagers, and we characterize these children as impulsive, irrational, and immature. We believe that when you're not a teenager, you're less likely to be mature and haven't really developed that critical thinking to actually allow you to differentiate between the consequences and whether or not you should do it. Number 3, we'd like to point out about the incentive of the parents overall. We believe that the incentive for the parent is to basically try their best to take care of the child and try their best to nurture them. So we say that this will still allow us on you. Now, going to my first argument is about how that's inherently unhealthy for children. We see that once the children actually gets a taste of how romantic relationships feel like, we believe that they're more likely to get addicted to it, unlike adults, because unlike adults, they do not have other responsibilities such as a career job, or they're also unable to think about the consequences if things were to go wrong. And so because of this, we say that it's almost impossible to regulate these children from getting into relationships because we're more likely to believe that we can get addicted to this feeling because number 1, we believe that they're more immature and stubborn. For my case setup, I already explained to you why. And number 2, as I already mentioned, we say that they don't understand the consequences of actually getting into a relationship, such as toxic relationships, which I'll build on even more. And so another reason why they don't understand the consequences is because they haven't learned sex education. We believe that right now in the current society, the reason why children cannot learn sex education, other than it being inappropriate, is because they don't have the mental or the mental capacity to actually be able to take it into account and understand what it actually means. And so because of this, we believe that this is one reason why they're unable to understand the consequences when getting into relationships. Your point.
When you allow your child to get into a relationship, does this create a bigger incentive to teach sex education? They might actually do it, right?
We believe that if your child were to go into a relationship, we believe that even if we were to teach sex education, we believe that they won't really be able to understand what it actually means. And number 2, we also believe that they do not have the incentivized to actually take it into account because we really point out that the only reason actually want to have relationships is for the feeling, not for like the other benefits, because we believe that children are so immature to think about the consequences and only want to follow the feeling from being able to talk with a partner or like hold hands. So basically, what's the impact of this? We say that any harm that these kids could do, like for basically like kiss like a girlfriend or boyfriend on the cheek. We say that this is something that's irreversible, that they have to say why it isn't a bad thing. Because we say that when you kiss someone, that's your first kiss, and that's something that you might regret in the future. And we believe that because of this, that's one of the main impacts, because you cannot turn back time and actually change your mistakes, which we believe that children are more likely to make these rash decisions, such as kissing someone. Now, number two, why is it another reason inherently unhealthy for children? We say about toxic relationships. Why is this? Number one, we say children are more likely to be afraid of telling their parents that they're in relationships, because we say that most likely parents will obviously deter them from getting into any relationships, because we say that is what the parent's responsibility is. And so because of this, another reason is because they're addicted to the feeling that we say. So because of these two reasons, these two factors, we believe that if children are stuck in these toxic relationships, they're most likely not able to get out. Now, we say that this is because however, it is the parents' incentive to take care of them. And because of this, we believe that if children were to continue with these relationships and go since they're young, they'll eventually be captured in these toxic relationships, because now they're chained with that partner, and because of that, they're too afraid to tell anyone, which we believe why it's inherently unhealthy. Now, my second argument is how that it lets children explore other forms of fulfillment. We already pointed out other forms of fulfillment, such as academics or friends. And we say that love isn't a primary source of happiness right now. We say that there are other things that can actually allow a child to fulfill their joy and other things. However, we say that relationships will most likely lock them out from doing other things, such as hanging out with friends, or like doing activities or focusing on studies. Why is this? Is because when you're in a relationship, you obviously have obligations. Yes, sure, children might not actually know the full aspect of what a relationship is, but because of their love and their addiction to it, they're more likely to put their 100% into it and try to make it last forever. And so because of this creates obligations that they have to fulfill, which takes the time away that they could be using on other things such as studies or doing sports. And so because of this, we believe that this takes more time and focus, which obviously takes away the focus from other things and other fulfillments that they could actually go for, and it's actually healthier. So what is the impact of this? We say that, sure, in the short term, they might get a bit of experience in relationship, but we already mitigated that and say that, first of all, we say that the experience isn't really that important, because we believe that you can still get it in teenagers and it's more likely to be unhealthy. But number two, on our side, we think the long-term impact is better, because number one, you're able to focus on studies, you're able to flourish even more in the future, and number two, you're more likely to learn sex education when you're a teenager, when you're in high school, which prepares you when you want to get a girlfriend or when you're going to get into a relationship. And because of this, we believe that we win this debate, and we believe that children should not get into relationships when they're young.
Okay, thank you so much. I now call upon the Leader of Opposition to start up opposing Dan. Here.
Am I audible? Alright, cool. I'm not using my test. Final. We believe the greatest values in life is the ability for you to have love. But the prerequisite for love to manifest is the ability for you to create trust. It's the ability for you to create boundaries. We believe this can only be established in a world where you don't prohibit this. But let me just highlight the failures of opening government in this debate and what closing government will also follow. They would probably say that there is that the prerequisite to allow fulfillment for a child is for them to have a taste of academic validation, is for them to have other aspects of fulfillment in life. But they never really tie it back as to why exactly the parents themselves, the main stakeholders, the actor debate would benefit from all of these aspects. We'll tell you why specifically on OO you're able to get all of this. But before that, a couple of responses to nonsensical ideas come from the opening opposition. Firstly, is that they will constantly be addicted towards these cycles of love, and there will be no regulation towards this. Panel, firstly, that relies on the contingency for you to have the ability to talk to a woman. If you're someone like me, for example, you're unable to charm women, you're unable to opt into relationships over and over and over again. So I believe the point of addiction really manifests unless you're someone like equal here, which happens in the minority of cases in those instances. Secondly, breaking up is another deterrence towards this. If you already feel like emotionally, like viscerally scarred from your breakup, you're less likely to opt into relationships that in the future. We believe on the comparative, when your parents are there with you, when you have support structures in place to help you navigate through that aspect of life, you're more likely to feel better. I'll extensify that in my arguments later on. But most importantly, we believe that in the instance of which you break up, but you're unprohibiting this, we think that it is far more better, which ties towards my second response about sex education. What did they tell you? People are more likely to opt into sex just because they are in relationships. Final, I don't think it necessarily works like that. I think there's some hurdles to get into sex. But what if these individuals were to have sexual relationships, have sexual tendencies because they are children within the status quo? I think this is absolutely absurd. If you're a parent that is unprohibiting these children, for example, you're less likely to antagonize your children for getting into these relationships in the first place. In the cases of which you were to fail, for example, you're less likely to say, I told you so. I told you you shouldn't have sex with that girl. I told you that was the consequence of getting pregnant. That was the reason I prohibited that. And if your child understands that, they'll feel villainized. They'll feel viscerally scarred from this, and that there is less of an incentive for them to tell their parents anything at the end of the day. They're left to fend for themselves. They're left to capitulate on their own substance in those instances. We know that that is harmful. No, thank you, articulated. But in the 21st century, we believe there's already a huge incentive for sex education to be much more prevalent. Whether it's be on social media, for example, your school telling you how to use condom, we believe that those safeguards are already in place. In the comparative, when you don't antagonize your children, when you accept them wholeheartedly for this relationship, you're less likely to antagonize them. You're more likely to accept them in those direct instances. Thirdly, and I believe that this is the most crucial aspect, we believe OG never hit the mark of the debate. What exactly happens to the parents in the instances of which they were to break up, in the instances of which relationships do fail? We'll tell you that in our framing, in our arguments. No, I think we can go. So first, why do children crave love in those direct instances? We believe there are so many channels of influence. Your media, it looks like movies, for example. It looks like other people, your peers getting into love, for example. So you feel the natural cravings for love. And we believe as human beings, we're naturally obligated to have love in the first place because we're beings that require emotional social connection. What I don't agree with is that children are people who are just under the age. Because I believe most of the harms don't manifest. If you're a kindergartner who just gotten out of a relationship, the most harmful thing you get is cry and then forget about it in the first day and maybe find another new kindergartner girlfriend, for example. We believe the most likely comparative is a world where these teenagers are somewhat above the age of below the ages of 18, but more than 13, for example, because these teenagers are more proximate to all those channels of influence. We believe that in status quo, and this is more likely than. The trade-off is these relationships and these breakups might not be great, but we believe that the navigation that you get coming from these parents is in of itself sufficient for you to have the established support structures. So you can create that transparent household where you can feel the need to tell your parents everything. And even if you don't get constantly antagonized. You don't feel like you're alone. You don't feel viscerally scarred for these instances. Why then do these peers have some degree of respect for their parents? We believe that this is important. Your mother carrying you for 9 months, your mother or father constantly feeding you at your home, for example, being in a job for you and giving you all these kinds of things that you want as a child, for example. We believe in those direct instances, there is some degree, a sense of respect and some sort of obligation that these peers or these children might feel towards their children, even if they might be rebellious. Before I move on towards my argument, Shrika, what are these values of trust to a parent, something can only obtain through these relationships? Oh yeah, I'll tell you that. So first argument then, how are you actually able to build your emotional capacity through the involvement with your parents? Why do we say this? We understand parents aren't monoliths, they're not one-dimensional. They are humans and make mistakes. Because come on, we all are living once on this earth, right? But we believe that to flip any substantive coming CG or OG, say that parents are more experienced, so they're more likely to say and to understand that there is more deterrence from a relationship because that's better for you in the long run. We believe that to flip that, they can understand and help their child actually navigate towards these instances, navigate towards the circumstances, because indeed they know better, because like she got a baby, which is you, so they know to some degree what a relationship is and what a good idea of a relationship is. But to a large extent, you build that transparency towards a household that asserts that you can say whatever the hell you want, but you're not going to get antagonized for that. You can build that sort of transparency, and that itself isn't going to be demonized. That in of itself helps to build that connection and emotional barrier within the child. We believe the ability for them, the child to grow up, to like have that support structure and to fight between parents is much better. But why then is there a degradation of the support structures without that? In a lot of instances, in status quo, growing up in Western liberal countries, for example, there are other media of influence, for example, social media, like the far left telling you that religion should not inhibit you from opting into this, opting into relationship because it's either like you not get salvation from God, for instance. And in those cases, feel rebellious. Children will feel and understand why exactly did my parent do not allow me. Why is religion the barrier in the your parents, then these individuals are going to be visually scarred to the point of which they like contribute and say that I'm a fear towards my society, I do not protect my child. But even then, we believe in those direct instances, if you as a parent feel visually scarred and feel that in itself is harmful towards the parents, which is the context behind this motion, up for up.
Thank you so much. And now call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue opening government's case. Here.
Am I audible? Before I begin, I just want to say a massive thank you to my mom for always supporting me, my dad who's just watching, my partner me, amazing food and hospitality. There is an intrinsic flaw in love. Its magnetic pull, unreasonable hyperfocus, and inherent irrationality. And it is for that very reason that the Bible, Quran, and 1,000 other scriptures frown upon it. Not just as a form of lust, but with the idea that it's focused on you, and the idea of who we want you to be and not who you actually are. For all the reasons that they give you as to why you care about love, what you crave as a child is not love, it's connection. Insofar as you choose to get connections from fulfillment, passion, and friendship, their case is an immense wash. I'll prove three things. Firstly, why is it impossible to regulate? But before that, I have two problems with OO. The first is the idea of support structures. They say they can have early sex education. Firstly, this was never a problem to begin with. The problem I have is this. The idea of the impact of the relationship you have during love was something that children could never completely understand. Things like, physical contact, things like kissing, things like spending so much time with them. They don't understand the impact it has on their child, on their future partners, and that was something that they could never comprehend with. Secondly, the idea of hormones, right? The reason why we don't expose kids to early sex education is because their hormones make them volatile, unstable. The moment you show them these graphic images, it's the moment they're likely going to be incredibly unstable. That leads to more volatile things down the line. The second thing that I have a problem with is the idea of rebellion. And look, we let children go into, we let teenagers why children of love that we have constructed. And insofar as the household, our most prominent social environment is one that friendship, other passions, and your hobbies probably care about. We don't think this idea of love is necessary. Okay, why is it impossible to regulate? The premise here is that the model of solidarity and not antagonizing simply does not work for the reason that the standard we give for love is one of commitment. Those parents care about this because they worry about their children naturally. You came out of it means that these parents have the incentive to create a dynamic between the parent and the child in which they try not to worry. And will create anxiety for the parent. Are built on trust for two reasons. The first is that every interactions you have are not monitored, right? Like as an 8-year-old, every but secondly, the boundaries of the mind isn't something we can access. Epistemic access towards how the children is thinking. And we say that as in a relationship, it inherently takes a huge toll on your mind. Hours spent thinking about this person, fantasizing, it takes away your commitment and hyper-focus away from your studies and things that actually matter. And so therefore, if you don't have 24-hour surveillance, you cannot have this amount of trust be effective. And secondly, even if you don't have trust, we say it's likely going to be broken. Because the part of the brain that you have that which is responsible for is heavily underdeveloped as a child, right? You have not matured yet, and that's probably the same reason why you don't understand what your parents are telling you, and my mom keeps calling me stubborn every time I refuse to listen to her. Next, I want to talk about addictiveness, and this is important. Love is like a drug. That's a very common phrase we've heard, right? But it's more so than that, in that it's like being colorblind, and then for the first time seeing colors. Obviously, you're going to like it a lot without knowing that these colors might be bad for you and it blinds you far into the future. Because the moment that you experience something like that, it brightens up your life, you have found someone that fulfills your every need, you're likely not going to want to unhook yourself from it. And the moment you latch on this person, it's incredibly harmful because it clouds your mind away from other priorities. The academic studies, which by the way, help you get a very financially stable job, which we say provides you with more choice, flexibility, far into the future. That's far more beneficial than a 7th grader constantly spending time with this person, not focusing in their studies. Thirdly, the idea of love as a child is all-encompassing. It seeps into every aspect of your life, and that is important. Because as someone who fulfills every need, you're likely to spend a lot of time with them. And if you really like this person, there is no stopping, there is no regulating, apart from your own innate experience, right? So as a child, you're probably going to want to continuously spend time with them. And if that's something your parents probably support, then it's something that cannot be regulated and it's going to be worse down the line. What are the implications of these 3 observations? Is that this relationship will manifest in a very unhealthy manner in 2 ways. First, you are trapped in a perpetual cycle of arguments. This is the fact that every time you've done something wrong, or you might think you're doing something wrong, you start agonizing over it. Or when you think of a gift for them, or you're not good enough, or just the fact that maybe they have this one action that you don't like. All these show that love is torture. So our stance is this: if you still want love as a teenager, fine. But the narrative we create is one that prioritizes friendship. We think that is far better. But secondly, when it comes to the eventual fallout, for all the reasons we give to you on why you're so addicted, this fallout is likely to be amplified 100-fold. That's why you're likely to be in despair, you won't focus on your studies. Even more so, your emotional capacity is broken, so you don't want to engage in relationships anymore. I'll take you later.
Why then, on the comparative, are all of these things somehow better in a world of which you prohibit these instances?
Okay, you know what? I'll do that in my 3rd flash. Okay. Why is this important? Why should we care about why it's impossible to regulate? Because it sets a precedent that extends far into your life that love is number one. The moment that you enter a romantic relationship, it probably means that it's something that you should care about. That tells our other alternative, which is why it's bad. And here's where our answer is POI. On why our positive, substantive, and counterfactual was debate winning. And look, I want to talk about other forms of fulfillment. Because during love, it's a one-to-one dynamic unless you're in a polyamorous relationship. Let's not talk about that. The burden is on this person to fulfill all of your needs, right? Like whether or not you're in emotional despair, they still have work, but they still have to comfort you. But notice, you only care about this because you've never thought about other alternatives in the first place. Things like alcohol community groups if you're suffering, things like clubs. Multiple people in which you can still derive fulfillment from, but at least you can get more mindset and get more advice, right? And that's important because I want to introduce here another idea on why this is a must. Because there is a principle for children to be children at some point, right? They're unspoiled, they're pure. But as an adult, the moment you introduce things like sex education to them, it's the moment they cannot focus on their own free life. Like the moment you change them to their own hormones, I think it's incredibly harmful. And haven't even matured yet to say guarded full autonomy, that's an incredible crime. What was the narrative of love that we create? We said at the moment that you create, like you support this motion, is probably one that creates peer pressure into entering relationships. That's probably likely to be very volatile and incredibly inexperienced. On our side of the house, at least we show that the standard is something that has genuine connection. You care about this person, but you as friends. So even if you still create love and you like this person a lot, you're still able to fulfill your own wants and needs. And for that reason, we think experience is a wash, it's impossible to replicate. And for all those reasons, the only relation that you can possibly conceive of is OG. Thank you.
Alright, thank you so much. I want to give a reminder to the crowd to keep the volume down, but also the chairs are really squeaky, and the squeaky sounds are really distracting. So as much as possible, try not to squeak. All right? Okay. I'd like to now invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to present their speech. Here.
Starting my speech, I think the very fact OG isn't able to dial this bill back to his parents, that's the point which their case is a wash from the start. But two things that, first, responding to the case coming from them, secondly, you're clear comparative as why the benefits on OO outweighs on houses, right? But first, let's take a look at the contingency on side of OG, right? The only assertion on it, the main assertion that they give is that number one, children are irrational, children are immature, and then they assert that these children they then also said that these issues then is gonna like mess up everything for this child. Right? We think there's two responses to this. Number one, we think that when you're because of these things are because of the increase like you're because they try to characterize that children are irrational or immature. It doesn't mean just because they want to jump into an idea of relationship, it doesn't mean they're gonna try and kiss every single day or something like that. We could barely say status quo. Not all children, just because they like someone or just because they want to be in a relationship with someone, doesn't mean every single day they're going to be going to their house, sleeping with them or something, or kissing them, right? I feel like it's fair to say also status quo. People who do jump into relationships for the fact that they want that. They want to be able to talk to someone. They want to be able to go and eat with someone. We don't necessarily say that just you being in a romantic relationship goes to say that, hey, things like intimate things like having sex or like kissing someone or holding hands, we think that is fairly uncharitable outside of government. Right? But secondly, that we think it's also uncharitable for some government to be like tying back all of these impacts towards these kindergartens, towards these people in primary schools. Because look, panel, even if you were to have a girlfriend when you were a kindergarten or if you were like if you were a primary school person, we tell you that the harms then are very minute, right? For a few reasons. Number one, the fact that Arya clearly told you, if you're a kindergartner, the most likely that will happen to you is that okay, you break up by at least you cry about it for a few days and then you forget about that. We don't think there's a necessarily like major like bad harm that makes it so like groundbreaking to the point. Right? But secondly, then we think that look, the debate is not necessarily about people under 30. Right? The fact that clearly in the motion it states like children towards their parents, we tell you that people under 18, people within teenagers who are the most prominent to jump into relationships are the most important. Look, their benefits are only contingent upon these like small people. So we think it's unfair for them to like say this. Right? But secondly, then we also have to realize that yeah, sure.
If trust is the only intrinsic benefit from your case, why can't you build that from sharing about your stress or your own experiences from school with your parents?
Look, these are also things that exist on side of OO, right? Because you have to realize the fact that your parents are prohibiting you from something that is very intrinsic within your life for the ability for you to like have a relationship with someone, that to show that also already has like that's to say it's generally already hard for you to talk to your parents, to talk about your stress, to talk about your academic like problems for instance. Like we the point in which you prohibit this, it even like clearly like amplifies that message. Like, we tell you that on the comparative on side of OO, not only are you able to like develop this trust, but number two, you send a message to these children that hey, it's okay for you to talk to your parents about these things. Your parents do care about these things. Your parents are not monoliths, they're not 40-year-olds who don't know anything about your life. They care, right? But secondly, then we think it's also unfair because we think it's also unfair for some OG to come out and tell you sex education will not exist on OO. But like we think that this is very unsensical. Right? The fact that we're living in a very like progressive like state in life, the fact that you have social media, the fact that you go to school, the fact that you have talks with your friends about women for instance, like, we think that these are things that can like definitely contribute to sex education. Right? The fact that everyone knows you talking to a girl has that boundaries, the fact that everyone knows you like having a relationship has that risk of like you being pregnant and like, have sex or something like that generally exists within OO, we think that's very unacceptable for the say it's exclusive to that like articulated that panel, sorry, but thirdly that panel, they also like try to push on the whole idea leadership you have obligation. Look panel, we have to make a clear distinction. You being in a relationship when you are a child is obviously not as it's not the same as you like getting married to someone. In these times, we don't really think they're really that big and that like problematic to the point where we flop that government is that hey, when people jump into this relationship, they're gonna be stupid. They're gonna feel they're not gonna talk to their friends. Things like they can still exist. In fact, that your partner now also goes to show that you have that sense of motivation for you to push yourself like towards the limits, right? But before I go to my questions,
When your child prefers to talk to a parent, their partner, what the parent will
partner about their own issues, like you guys have to like flesh it out properly. You have to still do good in your exams. You still have to like, talk to your friends about and all these things. Right? You still tell you panel that on a comparative, these things are not OG. We turn at the fact that OG is not able to give you a clear exclusive case and why their benefits are so exclusive towards them, and the fact that all of the claims are just assertions, we think that's fairly like harmful. But second clash then on the whole idea of how these children more. The fact that things like religion constantly blocks these relationships, and the fact that you're prohibiting your children from stepping into relationships, these children are going to be questioning things. It's going to be much more harmful. We think that's something that we do not want. This one was this is the pathway to the fact that number one, they want to step in. And number three, with unfair characterization that comes from OG that all children must have sex. We think that's fairly uncharitable. Side with sorry, no, not side yet. One more thing. And in fact that the comparative on OO is fairly better. spend time with my son, like talking to him about his problems, or like spending time like eating dinner with him. I think this is more meaningful to the parents. But also the idea of poverty. Realize, panel, hear me out on this. We tell you that on their side of the house, when you're also like spending time, like spending money, like buying gifts for your partner, or like using that money to like actually like do these dates in the first place, how then are the families in poverty going to necessarily break out of that cycle on your side of the house? Considering how these children are going to be so distracted from their studies to the point where they're not able to break out and be successful individuals, we don't think they're going to have the capital to break their families out of this poverty cycle. The harm is exclusive on both sides of opposition. But secondly, they also provide you no analysis as to why exactly that this trust can then manifest into a strong relationship. We think that emotional support and building this trust can come from many other ways. One, when you share your stress about school and your own experiences, that's something that parents can relate to as well, something that your parents can also guide you through. We also think that when you share your own experiences about, for example, like people bullying you or like people not talking to you or like friendships in general, which is something your parents also go through, this is something they can also share. Just because, no, I'll take you like later after my responses. I think like these are also the alternatives that exist on like CG exclusively, where you're able to build trust with your parents. But also they tell you that like that sex education will be a problem on our side because like these people are going to have like sex like everywhere, right? Look, let's point out a contradiction coming from OO. They tell you that when it's unlikely that these children opt into like sexual relationships, but then they tell you an entire argument about how when it happens, then they're not going to talk to their parents anymore. Huge contradiction coming from OO. I don't see what they're necessarily standing on. Now, before I move on to my own points of argumentation, I'll take a POI from CEDO.
Why is it realistic that these parents are going to allow like their children to have so much pocket money to the point where they go broke? Is that not extreme?
They're not going to allow that money. These children are going to find that money from their parents' credit card, from the credit card that they hide under their drawer. This is what's likely going to happen because you're doing it for love. But also, how then do we nuance over OG? Realize how the entire case was lacking a counterfactual and a fair characterization. They tell you that children are only 13 years old. We're going to play on the fairer characterization where children are also 18. The point in which, like the point before they actually go to university, right? But also, how did we build from OG? Most of their arguments were like mostly like focused upon the children themselves, about how they're going to like go like experience like good relationships, how they're like going to be addicted to lust, and how they're not going to succeed in their studies. How then is this harm tied back to the parents? One, when this child fails in their studies, the parent then has to spend more time to teach his kid in order to like improve their academics. Two, the parent spends less time at work in order to monitor their kid to ensure these problems don't like manifest into something worse. But thirdly, the parents themselves are going to get pressured from their other friends, their other parents, by like telling them like, why is your son like failing in school? Like what are you doing as a parent to help your kid? I think all these things are the harm that they were never like able to analyze and like prove to you something that only came from CG. And also, what is then the mechanism on their side? They tell you that prohibition is something impossible. I don't think that's really the case. If you want to hang out with your friends and you tell your parents to do so, then your friend just sends a picture of you with them, and I think that this is alone is already like the mechanism to show how you prohibit your son or your daughter from like going out and doing like these things, right? I feel like this is how we pivot over OG. The point in which we're able to show to you how then are we able to like put this harm back to the parents, how we're able to benefit them is the point in which we take this debate. No, we take you. Now, let's move on to argumentations about how we're able to build meaningful relationships with our parents. Let's realize something, panel. As a child, you spend the most of your time with your parents at home. You're also very busy with school and extracurricular activities, but you're also going to spend a lot of your time with your friends, like hanging out, for example. Why so? Because one, we believe that your childhood is like the most like less burdening time in your life, where you don't need to worry about things such as money and food. But also, we think that this is your honeymoon years. This is the point in which you're still staying at home. You don't need to move out and go to university and lead your own life. Why then does a relationship necessarily ruin this? And what is the issue there? First one, as a parent, okay, fine, sure.
You're making it sound like they're going to get married and get committed. Either way, they are going to get out. But if you're involved and actively involved, you're more likely to like cater towards your child. Your case is on the extreme. Please clear your character.
That is only under the assumption that you can only build trust from these relationships. I've already proved to you how you don't have to only rely on this relationship. Let's move on back to my argument. What then is the issue with these relationships? One, you spend less time with your parents. I think the line of logic is very simple, panel. When you spend time with your partner, going out on dates at like nighttime, for example, in the weekends, you're not going to spend as much time with me as the parent, right? We feel like our child is going to stay at school longer to meet their partner. They're going to spend their nights like sleep calling with their partner, right? But also secondly, I'm no longer the emotional support pillar. The point in which the child on your side now like resorts to their partner to basically be that emotional support like pillar. I now feel like as a parent, I'm also insecure about myself, and I also feel like I'm not provided enough to my child because he doesn't necessarily want to talk to me. On outside the house, parents can actually build like meaningful memories, like spending time with their like child physically, something they can look back on, which is exclusive to these children and most impactful to these children, because the point in which they graduate, they move out, they become adults, you're not able to do that anymore. This is the time in which you do. But also the point in which they break out and like break out of these relationships. One, we feel like these children are now going to opt out of marriage and not necessarily like go back into this construct because they are so scarred from this relationship. We don't think that they can provide a meaningful family, a meaningful like grandchildren for these parents to look back to raise them, to like have a continuation of the family lineage. These panel are the necessary and exclusive harm that happened to the parents that was like, missing from all sides. The point in which you believe so is the point in which CE takes debate. For all those reasons, never been proud to post.
Thank you so much. And now I'd like to invite the member of opposition to present their speech.
One second, I have like a bajillion papers that I need to rearrange. Can I just not use the mic?
Try to check up. Try to say something without the mic.
Hello, hello. Hi.
Is it?
Yeah, right.
I think the most important part of framing that was missed in the entire opening half is why parents have an intrinsic interest to want the best for their children. Sorry, to want to actually put this prohibition onto their children and to not want to put this prohibition towards their children in the first place. What the internal personal interest exists for them to want their children to be in a relationship or not. And most notoriously, I'd like to know that most of the arguments that have been given in the debate mostly relate to what is in the best interest of the children without explaining why it's correlated to the best interest of the parent itself. We think that's why closing opposition ends the debate. Ladies and gentlemen, the most important part of framing that we will provide from our speech is why exactly the actual interest to actually not want to prohibit children from having relationships comes from a generational gap in trauma. Right? Because inherently people from the past are agreeably more conservative, holding on to religious principles which prohibit the interaction of male and female adolescents. But how has that changed in these years from like those kind of times? One, we tell you that there has been a liberalization in media and society. We think media like news, social media, movies, and like narratives have become more and more liberal and progressive because of the rise of left-leaning organizations voicing out their interests within the public. For example, like advocacy for more freedom and moving away from hurtful conservative culture. It looks like, for example, children now being able to speak out about their interests while having to have a relationship, right? Because it's becoming more and more acceptable in society. And these kind of progressive narratives propagate through the media we consume, hence shaping the kind of interests and core principles that we have within parents and society today. Two, it looks like I'll just illustrate. It looks like, for example, during my teacher's age, you get beaten up by your parents if you have, for example, like hold hand with a girl, right? And you get caned by the entire village, for example, like interacting with a girl. But today, you could literally expose your girlfriend on Instagram, and people will even applaud you. Two, why do parents want to end a cycle of trauma? We think a lot of awareness towards abuse and what is considered good parenting has been stimulating through media today, like focusing on more liberal-leaning narratives which supports children's relationships because it seems more mass appealing than advice on prohibition. It's either, for example, a picture of parents bonding their children better because they don't fight over what the child wants or what the parents want, or for example, on proposition, a more grim-looking picture of parents having to inflict their own autonomy over their child, which looks more aggressive and hurtful, proving why parenting advice on media is also more likely to be more liberal and has more buy-in. 3. Why do parents buy into this kind of liberal media? We think this generational gap between parents back then, parents today, is the experiences that they used to go through. Right? Like for example, parents used to experience like the brunt of controlling and coercive parenting from the past. Right? So parents know how hard it is to be, like for example, raised under a very oppressive family and not be able to actually have a relationship with the girl that you love or something like that. Right? So insofar that the framing here is that parents want the best for their children, they wouldn't want their child to experience the same generational trauma which they did when they were younger, right? So this is the incentive analysis that is only available on closing opposition. And 4, and finally, if it wasn't clear, we characterize parents' interests to want the best interest of their children because often their happiness becomes your happiness as a parent, right? And when your children, when you as a parent have a good relationship with your kids, right, they are more likely to help you in the future and contribute, for example, the safetyness of you in the future. Before the uptake opening.
It's not about trauma, it's about culture. If they believe in children not being able to go into relationships, why would they change their mindset going into adulthood?
My entire framing was about how culture has changed because of the rise of liberal media, right? And we've already told you how exactly that media is more likely to be bought in. I don't think you've listened to my entire framing. First and foremost, let's go over a few responses before I go on to horizontal extension. The first thing that I would like to clarify is how most of the arguments on government are literally just irrelevant in today's debate. Because they tell you that, for example, hey, children are going to be less, for example, distracted when they don't have relationship, right? But they never tell you how exactly it's going to be in the best interest of the parent itself. They tell you, for example, the many benefits that accrue to children but never correlated to the main stakeholder of the main actor of today's debate. So we just don't get it. They might be good arguments, but they don't matter because it doesn't correlate. 2, they talk about how, for example, you get to teach sex education better because, yeah, these children are not in a relationship and they don't understand, right? But understand one thing here. Is that on their side of the house, they never have an actual incentive to have a talk about the birds and the bees, right? Because these children are more likely to not actually have sex at that kind of age. On our side of the house, the point where, for example, it is a possibility for children to have in a relationship, this creates an urgency for you to actually have that talk because it actually means that, it can be used to them to that age. Because on our side of the house, we have that urgency because it can actually happen. Finally, the framing is on how exactly children are irrational and children don't know about relationships, right? But we tell you the point where, for example, children can experience these kind of relationships at that age is the point where they actually learn. It's the point where, for example, they actually become less irrational and such. And they tell you that, for example, when children are irrational, they cannot learn. We think that's completely extreme because they don't actually analyze why exactly that is true. Next, closing government enters the debate and they tell you a few things. First of all, is that families are going to go broke because their children steal from their credit card. 1, we tell you that this is already contingent upon an assumption that this happens, therefore it's kind of not strong. 2, we tell you that it's incredibly extreme. So for example, to just say that hey, children are going to, for example, steal and do the worst towards their parents, right? Because it frames these children as like soulless people who do not actually care about their parents. We tell you that the most likely outcome is that this happens in those extreme instances which are most likely to not happen. That's why their argument falls. Now, 2, they tell you that, for example, parents, they don't want their kids to fail in school because, that's good. But we tell you that this is an assumption that children only fail when they're in relationships, right? Because you can, for example, have a relationship, be a top student, or have a relationship and be a bottom student, right? But it doesn't matter because their framing is contingent upon them blaming the relationship for all the failure that happens. We think that's completely convenient and that point falls. And finally, they tell that parents get to spend more time with the children, right? This is an actual argument that stands. How do we take this down? 1, we tell you that this is actually mitigated by the fact that parents still actually spend time with their children. Like this is something that happens on our side of the house as well. But 2, we tell you that the point where parents want the best for their children, right? We tell you that this looks like, for example, when your child is happier when they can spend time with their girlfriend, it makes you happier, so we get more happiness for parents at the end of the day. Moving on to my horizontal extension, and that is why exactly parents are often encouraged or pressured to allow their children to have relationships. This is because oftentimes, the connotation towards parents that are more liberal are going to be more accepted towards society. It looks like parents, for example, allowing their, being okay with principles like allowing freedom, which allows you to be more mass acceptable towards society. Like just look at Malaysia right now. This is like more liberal, right? But we tell you by virtue of the liberal media we consume, right? People are, for example, going to allow more likely to push away the conservative principles that they have and have a change of heart. Why is this important? Because 1, we tell you that on their comparative right, you, for example, when you do not, for example, have when you do not, for example, allow your children to have these sort of relationships, right? You're going to be, for example, you're going to be attributed to negative negative kind of things, like for example, you being more oppressive, or like you being more like oppressive towards your children, right? And you being less open-minded. We tell you the impact from this is this contributes to more alienation towards these parents, right? Because it looks like, for example, more gossip towards you. Other parents don't want to be friends with you and don't want to support you because it doesn't like their own interest, right? And we tell you that this is going to be very bad because it means that your parents are less likely to be happy within this world. We tell you that when parents want to be happy, they ought to actually allow their children to have relationships. We tell you to propose.
Alright, thank you so much, and I'd like to call upon the government whip to end the government bench here.
Yeah.
Before I start, say thank you for everyone for making this tournament best. This is my first finals in UIA, so yeah. Final, romantic relationships are something beautiful that eventually every adult has to succumb to at one point. But for a child to participate in such relationships at such an early stage in their life, we tell you it's useless, unnecessary, and harmful. I know this is ironic coming from me who doesn't have a girlfriend, but nonetheless, we'll prove to you all these points, we'll prove to you why, at the end of the day, these are all true. Now, moving on to some call-outs then. Number one, my problem with opening up is that we assume that all of these romantic relationships and romantic partners are going to be the perfect one from the get-go. But let's look at these things properly and logically, right? Adam already explained to you how children aren't the best people at necessarily picking a partner. Meaning to say that the only people you actually be attracted to at a young age are probably the people who look pretty, the people who look nice. This doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to be the best partner for your life. This doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to be the partner that you're going to stick to throughout all of your life. I don't think any side of opening was able to actually talk about this and tell you why it's a problem. We told you about this on the side of CG. But number two then, the biggest problem then, the second biggest problem that we have in that case is that the only response coming from CO to our entire case was the idea of poverty. All our other arguments about how you're able to fulfill these parents in having meaningful relationships, all of these things like how you're able to have more time at home, where you're able to go out, have proper experiences with your child, all of these were unresponded to at all from CO. That's another big problem. That just shows to you that our case was already perfect from the start. Now, let's move on to some actual responses then. Like how, first let's take a look at, their reasoning for this is to say that because these parents allow and not prohibit their children from having these relationships, there's going to be a form of trust and bond that, gives these children the sense of, oh, my parent one, I don't see how a literal parent and child couldn't form these values in the absence of these romantic relationships. I feel like when you are outbreaking your child from their youngest early stage, from them being a baby, I feel like at the point in which they, for example, 10 years old, you've already formed a certain trust, a certain bond with your child. I don't see the necessity in you to have to allow these relationships for that trust to happen. But number two, even if you don't buy that explanation, we know that the child in opposition's world are more likely to open up about problems, things like stress, to his girlfriend than his parents. Because at the end of the day, these children are more likely to be able to voice out their concerns with this girlfriend. We know that the harm here then is that these parents are less involved. No response at all coming from OO and CO. But number three then, we tell that in situations like breakups or toxic relationships where this child isn't necessarily happy, we tell that now it is the extra burden of the parent to care for the child. We tell that everything that side of CO and O is fighting for is just harder for the parent to care for the child. It's just making it so much more harder for these relationships to manifest. Before I move on to my second response to it.
First, I can't tell you the reason as to why it matters more because it's intrinsic towards you. That's why you're more likely to open up. But second, a lot of people in this room have girlfriends. Why are we debating on fulfilling your obligation, not just dating your girlfriends in those extreme circumstances?
I would go to the lengths to say that the only meaningful relationships that are in this room right now are the ones of the adults. Because we have to understand that at a young age, where you have this need, where you have this want to have a relationship, that isn't necessarily the meaning or the reason for you to go for these relationships. Things like lust exist, things like having the want or the need to do something exist. That doesn't mean that it's the right thing. If you wanted to prove that it was the right thing, it should have came from OO. They did not give you proper reasoning to show you why it is right in the first place. This is why their argument doesn't materialize at the end of the day. Now, let's respond to CO then. The biggest harm that they propose to you on the their side of the house is about how things are liberal, thus you have to opt into this narrative. I know a few problems with this. Number one, CEO themselves concede that these parents of a different generation are more likely to be conservative people. So if that is the case, I don't understand how this harm necessarily manifests. But number two, just because there is a liberal view, that does not justify that these relationships are something that you should go for. That doesn't justify that these relationships are going to be in the best interest of the parent. Just because everyone is telling you to do so, that doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. I think Adam already gave you like 5 lines of analysis as to why this is the case. We know that this argument is something untrue. But number three, then, the idea about hating your parents because they are too constrictive. Is the moral obligation for these parents to form a certain bond or a certain trust with their children prior to them being exposed to all of these things like love, all these things like relationships. We tell you at the end of the day, parents are still able to have these relationships, children are still able to love their parents when they understand that their parents are doing these things because of the fact that they care for their children at the end of the day. We tell that this idea of hate towards the parent is very circumstantial. Before I move on any further,
Parents like this kind of pressure inflicted upon them because there's liberal media.
Panel, this is why it is important for these parents to tell their children early on why they're doing these kind of things. I think it's simple. The moral obligation of a parent to tell their children that they're doing this for the best of them, to tell their children that because of the fact that you trust me, the obligation for the parent to form a bond of trust, and then tell the children that they're doing it for the best of them. I think that can simply deal with all of these narratives, of all of these ideas that the child will hate the parent at the end of the day. Now, panel, let's talk about the actual clash in this debate, the fulfillment of the parent himself, the actor. Something that both opening sides, I think, failed to actually properly talk about. I think we've already told you 6 whole points, right? Number 1, how you're able to bond with your child. Number 2, how these children can focus on things that really matter. Number 3, how you're able to have your child being more fulfilled by doing other things easier. Number 4, how you're able to how these parents are able to give their children the emotional support that they want to seek from someone else. Number 5, how we're able to help people like poor families not mess up with their child's future. And number 6, how you're able to actually form meaningful memories, going out together, watching a movie together, how these simply being at home is something meaningful for these parents. These are all exclusive for children specifically because this is at the point in which they're the most proximate to their parents. Adam already gave you a lot of analysis to show you why eventually when you become an adult, there's no more time for you to have these kind of relationships. There's no more time for these parents to bond with their children. This is the exact point in which this is so important. The only response that comes from the entire case about how you're able to make it less fulfilling for the parent is to say that in our world, these children will hate their parents. Look, I know the weighing and comparative here is simple. In our worst case, we're sure maybe the child will hate the parent. At least we prevent them from all the possible harms that we've given you. The 6 possible harms that we've given you, at least we tell you that there's something that is prevented, even if the child hates his parents. We tell you at the end of the day, the parents want the best for the parents. I won't be taking anymore. At the end of the day, the parents want the best for their children. At the end of the day, this is still in the incentive of what the parent wants to begin with. Now, panel, why do we take this over OGT? I think 3 things. Number 1, we actually provide you a proper mechanism that the Prime Minister forgot about. We told you how you can be able to check up on your child, take things like photos, these kind of things. These are simple mechanisms to show you how parents are going to prohibit their children necessarily. But number 2, only at the outside of the house do we highlight the larger burden that parents have to protect their children from all of these harms. And specifically why it's important for these parents to protect this childhood, to protect this very fragile and young stage of their life. Only this characterization and analysis came from outside of the house. But number 3 then, all of the material panel, if you realize from Deputy Prime Minister about how you're able to appreciate relationships more when you eventually get into one, or how you're able to have more genuine connections with these people that you want to be in a relationship with, that has nothing to do with what the parent cares about. These are all just benefits that only benefit the child. It has nothing to do with what the parent actually wants. Panel, if you want, in so far in which you are the only side that actually tell you how you're able to make these parents happy, in so far in which you're the only side to tell you how we're able to look into the best interest of the parents, to care most about the child and how the child is going to be brought up, I think it's very clear, panel. You want to work where the child has a happy life, where the parent is also happy, where the child doesn't do like weird things. CG.
Okay, thank you so much. I now call upon the opposition whip to present their speech. Here.
Either one side. Testing, testing. Anyone hear me?
Yes.
Setting the timer. Alright, first start. Thanks, Mom and Dad, and Coach Brian, if you're watching. The way in which CEO wins this debate is simple. We give the most realistic characterization about what these parents' best interests actually are, and we also tell you how it's not in the best interest of the parents to actually restrict their child from getting into relationships. Two things in my speech. First, what actually happened in this debate. Secondly, I'll go up more thoroughly against OG and CG in terms of responses. So, first, I'd like to point out the problems within all of top half and also CG. First, in terms of OG, I think they assume and assert that everyone in status quo wants a girlfriend. Right. Note that this is different than the call out that OO made. That call out was about how not all children want to have sex or have a kiss their girlfriend. No, I say that OG asserts the fact that everyone wants a GF in the first place. Right. We tell you that this point lacks nuance, and also many people have other interests, which means that they're also unlikely to have girlfriends. And this also beats out their whole point about opportunity cost, which means that it's a wash. Why is this so? Because if they say, if I accept that studies are important, like OT says, then that means that studies should be a priority, right? They tell you that love will always be a priority, but they don't give you any analysis why students will actually prioritize that over their own studies, right? Which means even if their analysis does prove that children care about love, but they don't care why it takes priority over all of their other things. But also I'd like to note that they have a convenient characterization, which is that they tell you that kids are under 13. I tell you this is completely absurd because children under 13 don't necessarily have enough capital to get into a relationship in the first place. This is quite absurd. I'll take you later. So, secondly, what does OG tell you? OO literally knives themselves because they have these two strict contradictions. Because firstly, Vargan says that children will be afraid to tell their parents about their relationships. Our friend says that children will suddenly open up to their parents. Which one is it? They don't tell you. But secondly, in terms of the mechanism in which they use to try to deter children, right? Because they tell you both that they will vilify their children if they open up about their relationships, and also accept the fact that they're in relationships. I don't know. I'm genuinely unclear about which mechanism you're going to use to try to deter them. But even so, I'll still independently beat both of these mechanisms. Firstly, in terms of vilification, I tell you that this is bad because they'll also likely opt out of their own support structures. Why is this so? Because they'll hate their parents for literally antagonizing them, for literally making them feel like they are a bad person. But if you say that, if you take the other lane and say that, we'll simply accept them if they open up by the relationship, I tell you that this is simply wrong in that's your own case because they literally don't learn. Secondly, CG has a lot of assertions about for instance, the fact that children will access the credit card to their parents. I tell you that love may overcome everything, but they can't overcome the strategic barriers that are needed to get the credit card in the first place. But also, a lot of their point on opportunity cost is quite derivative, and I've already told you why this is a wash in this debate. How then does closing opposition enter this debate? Note that both opening teams are really utopian in terms of what the best interests of the parents are. That is to say that they don't treat parents like people. They treat parents like people who are altruistic and only want what's best for their child. No, I tell you that the point at which their child is at least well off, the parents still have the best interest that a normal human would. They still want to be safe. They still would not want to be alienated. How then does closing opposition enter? We give a new characterization about what the best interests of these parents actually are, which is to literally not to be alienated. And we also give you a new framing, which is crucial because we tell you that there is a stigma to be overly conservative by prohibiting, to not be overly conservative by prohibiting what your child can do. We also tell you that parents don't like these pressures because it harms the reputation of their ability to seek help with male bonds in their community. We give you the solution is that when you allow children to have relationships, you push people away from, you push them away from the pressure so that they can form bonds with the other communities and their other parents, which means they can be happier for that'll take opening.
By our logic, parents should give absolute freedom to their child. If a child's happiness makes parents happy, what can relationships do that getting friendships time?
No. It's not about having liberty to do anything. It's about giving your child liberty to do the things that they want. Right? I don't think you'll be vilified or antagonized if you restrict your parents from if you restrict your child from doing something harmful. But even then, I'll still engage on the clash about whether or not this harms children by flipping all the arguments from government side. What does OG tell you? OG gives you 4 claims that are all silly.
First, they tell you that children will be addicted. Three responses. First, that this is quite unrealistic. I say the fact that you say that they don't even know about sexual education means they're unlikely to opt into the fact of literally kissing your girlfriend, right? But second, they'll flip this and tell you why this is worse on your side of the house. This is worse because if you restrict what your child can do with the ability of your child to get into relationships, it's worse on your side because they become more desperate to go into these relationships. Because humans innately crave these relationships, and as per open government's characterizations, they have hormones. They want to get a girlfriend. On the government side, when you restrict these children from going into relationships, the craving for these relationships are increased, and this is bad because this means they are more desperate to enter the relationships, which means they're more likely to opt into toxic relationships because their barriers on what they consider to be a good girlfriend are likely dropped. Right. Second point they give you is how heartbreak is bad. Two responses. Firstly, this is quite a short-term argument. They tell you that heartbreak is bad. I tell them that they'll likely move on after 6 months. But secondly, heartbreak is good. Why is this so? Because through this they learn how to maintain relationships. Sure, it's bad. They also give you good lessons. We tell you that this in turn is better for children. No. So thirdly, they tell you about peer pressure. Yeah, we already watched this on both sides of the house because the peer pressure is likely to be symmetrical, and they also tell you that this peer pressure is likely to harm parents. And we also fourthly tell you that there's significant opportunity cost. We tell you that this is symmetrical because of the fact that because of what I told you in my intro. What does closing government give you? No, they give you 2 points that they're both silly. Firstly is how you'll get backlash because of the fact that because you say that their children will opt into harmful things. I've already proven this premise false. Do things backlash because your child's studies will go down. I've already proven this premise false because this is symmetrical. That doesn't happen. But secondly, we've already flipped this point because we tell you why on your side of the house too, parents face backlash, and we also weigh this out because the backlash that happens to parents for prohibiting what their children can do is more likely because because on your side of the house we don't even know if children's studies will go down. Second point they give you is that you'll have to spend less time with your parents, and also they tell you that you'll have less trust with your parents. I'll flip this in the same way, which is that children grow up to resent their parents. Because imagine how the child perceives the fact that you prohibit what they can actually do. They likely feel trapped by their parents. They likely resent their parents because they feel like they're not doing what's best for their child, right? Which means that this is worse on your side of the house because they're likely to opt out. They're likely to abandon their parents because they feel like they're not doing what's best for them. How do they challenge this? 2 ways. We tell them that they have a moral obligation to do what's best for the child. This is an assertion, but we also tell them that the moral obligation is independent of the best interests of the parents. They also weigh this against the harms. We tell them that this is contingent on the incorrect characterization of parents of the parents' best interests, and have also mitigated a lot of these harms. Thus, proud to win from closing opposition.
Alright, thank you so much. That is the end of our grand finals for 2025 IDC English category. And we're gonna move to deliberate now. Bye.
Alright, so before all of you going outside of the hall, so there's an announcement. Next, we will be moving. Oh, yeah, sure.